Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Caretakers and the Arts panel. I'm just going to go over a few bits of housekeeping, and then I'll turn it over to our panel. My name is Jenny Yarley. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Realms Development Manager. Just a few bits. So we are in Zoom webinar. If you have any questions, you can submit them through the Q&A function. And then if you see any questions in the Q&A function that you'd like to see answered, you can actually upvote those by clicking the little thumbs up sign. We've also turned on live transcriptions. If you need those, the button should be in your toolbar. If you have a problem with that, let me know in the chat. The Realm seeks to be an equitable, inclusive, anti-oppressive, anti-racist organization. More information on our mission and our values is available on our website, which I'll link in a minute. Those values extend to this virtual space. If at any time you feel you experience something that is not in alignment with those values, please feel free to either chat me directly or follow up via email at community@playwrightsrealm.org. As part of those values, if you incurred any costs associated with caregiving to attend this panel, tomorrow you'll receive an email that has a link to a Google form where you can submit a receipt, and we will be happy to reimburse you for those costs. I'm joining you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Lenape, and I offer recognition, respect, and acknowledge that colonialization is an ongoing process that continues to impact the lives and lands of Native communities. I want to also acknowledge that in addition to the physical land that we occupy today, the platforms, technology, and equipment that we are using consume resources that are based in physical lands and are not universally accessible by all people and communities. I'll also share a link in the chat for those who would like to learn more about the spaces we occupy, especially where you are today. And you can feel free to take a minute and name those in the chat as well. Without further ado, I'll pass to Roberta.
Hi, everybody. I am Roberta Pereira. I am the producing director of the Playwrights Realm. And I just want to welcome you all here to talk about something that I'm very excited about, which is caretaker support. And I just want to invite some fellow panelists. We're going to cover a lot today. And as Jenna said, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A. We are going to go through some of the challenges, and these are individual challenges. I'm hoping to also talk about some best practices, some of the things that people are doing in the field. So we can also learn a lot today, hopefully. But please, we want this conversation to be useful to everybody that's here today. So please use that Q&A so we can also respond to those questions. So I would like to ask to join me now, Rachel Spencer Hewitt and Jonathan Payne.
Hello.
Hi, Jonathan
Hi.
and Rachel. And we might have another panelist, Tanya, who might be joining us, so she might be popping in just so if she shows up. But I'm so excited to have both of you here today. This is something that, as you know, is near and dear to my heart and part of the core values of the Realm and some work that we've been doing for a while. But I do want to get a little bit, instead of doing like a regular introduction, I want to ask some specific questions about both of your backgrounds as artists, and then go, kind of connect that to your roles as caretakers. So Rachel, you are an artist, but you're also an advocate. So can you tell us a little bit more about the Parent Artist Advocacy League, PAL, which I'm sure you all hear us talk a lot about today? Why did you start that organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I started that organization out of a necessity that was both personal and I noticed communal. I'm an actor by trade. Roberta, you and I went to the Yale School of Drama together, which now has a new name that I will work very hard to remember. But as an actor, when I became pregnant for the first time, because I had only had a few anecdotes to memory in terms of what I was expected to do or say. I kept my pregnancy a secret for a very long time. I didn't tell my agents, didn't tell my family, didn't tell my friends, until I was about 5 months and the flowy tops weren't covering it in auditions anymore. So I ended up telling my agents and realizing that I set a very somber tone for the conversation. And I shut the door and he's like, what's wrong? Is everything okay? And I was like, well, okay, I'm pregnant. And he leapt out of his seat with joy and celebrated me, threw the door open and celebrated me to the whole agency. And I would later come to realize that that's a very rare reaction, actually. But what he did was he set a tone. He set a standard for me that then when I realized the reaction was so rare, I realized I had so much fear walking into audition rooms still. I tell people now that I'm realizing more and more as time goes on, how so much of it had to do with my experience in my 20s being an actress in this field, not feeling like I could trust people with my body and with the changes that it made. And so becoming pregnant, that understanding was deeply rooted inside me that I can't trust the field with how my body is changing and what it does. And so I did the whole pull myself up by my bootstraps all the way till she was 1.5 years old. And then I was talking to a colleague about it and I was celebrating my successes and talking about my agent support. And he stopped me from talking about it. And he said, oh, that's not everyone's experience. So I wouldn't talk about that. And I realized in that moment of being silenced that if I couldn't talk about my successes, who were these people that he was trying to protect? What other people are being silenced? If successes can be talked about, what about the failures? What about the stories that are being buried and shoved underneath? And I thought about it obsessively. The whole ride home with my infant. And in that moment, I realized that while I was at a Christmas party networking, my daughter was a few blocks away in a Starbucks with the babysitter where I had changed clothes after doing a bus ride all the way to this party for these people to make it look like I didn't have a baby. It was like this collision moment of there's something severely wrong here. And I started to do research on Mam Ireland and Pippa in the UK. And I started researching and writing about it. And instead of following his advice in shutting up, I started a blog and I published my experiences. And then stories started to pour in, everything from I've been so scared to start a family because of this to I was fired because I was pregnant. And I realized, oh, this is a systemic problem. This has to do with people breaking the law. This has to do with discrimination. And a friend of mine tweeted me after one of my articles came out and said, we need to start something in the US. And so within 4 months, we got together with a group of moms who felt similarly, and we launched Parent Artist Advocacy League in Philadelphia, New Jersey, and New York, and dedicated our entire first year to motherhood and breaking the silence. And now PAL is all parent, all caregiver support. And we create resources. We gather resources that other organizations like you are doing and making sure they're available to folks. And we also create community and safe spaces where people can talk about their experiences, and we help them advocate for themselves and help organizations create supportive systems and structures.
Yeah, and I really encourage everybody to check out PAL and the work that they've been doing because it's truly groundbreaking. And Rachel and I got to work in a project together. And there's Tanya. Hi, Tanya. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Sorry.
Don't worry, just in time. Hey, life happens. This is what this is all about. This is literally what this panel is about. So yeah, and so Rachel and I worked on this great project together called the Radical Parent Inclusion Project, which I'm sure we'll talk about it. And we got to co-write an article about the experience for American Theater Magazine. So if you want to know a little bit more about the kinds of things that PAL does, check out their website, check out our article, which I'm sure we'll be sharing in the chat. But now I want to turn and talk a little bit to Jonathan and Tanya and like your experiences. And so you're both incredible artists. And we have worked with you with the Realm and in many different iterations. And so I am curious, in your experience, if you could tell us a little bit about your creative journey so far, and how has being a caretaker affected your creative pursuits, both positively and negatively, because we forget, right? There are positive things and then there are negative things as well. So we'd love some of your reflections about that. Jonathan, do you want to start so we can give Tanya a second to breathe?
Yes, I guess a lady went first, so I can follow suit. So I'm Jonathan. I identify as a playwright. And I've been writing for many years now. I moved to New York thanks to NYU, so I went to Tisch and got a master's there in dramatic writing and started joining writers groups and found my way into the realm, which was an amazing surprise and exciting thing. It's kind of funny to think about because Catherine, she had come to NYU to talk about Playwrights Realm. So it's funny to think of being a student there and listening to her talk about the realm, and then eventually ending up there, and then eventually having the realm say, hey, we want to do a production of your play, which was, my first professional production, which was such an amazing thing. My life has literally changed because of it. And one of the most memorable things about that experience was the first week of shows, because I have a day job as a social worker. So I was working full time and then leaving work and then going into a show and taking notes and paying attention to how the play works, and then working late into the night trying to make sense of the stuff that didn't make sense, and and then back to work in the morning. And I remember the first sort of performance, I just couldn't pay attention. I was nervous and freaking out, and they're like, you need to pay attention, we're in previews now. And I'm like, I came from work, it's just a crazy time. But it was an awesome experience, and I will never forget it for the rest of my life. And so, it suffice it to say, my soon-to-be wife came to my opening night, and so we eventually got married. And as of March 9th, I had my first child right at the top of the pandemic, March 9th, 2020. So we were just before the doctors were kicking husbands out of the room. It's been a crazy year just in terms of coming to terms with a new child, raising a child through the pandemic, which is just a crazy experience. I was working from home. My wife was working from home. We had a 1-year-old. Her parents were here. It's a 1-bedroom apartment. No one was leaving the apartment. So it was quite high stress and a lot of juggling and stuff like that. But now the child is in daycare. His name is Hari. I'm new to this parenting thing, so I'm probably here to learn from others more so than talk about my experience. But I guess that's sort of a quick refresher.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And Jonathan, I remember on the opening night I put a link in the chat, by the way, if anybody wants to check out some information on the show we did. And I remember in your opening night, as you said, you came with who now is your wife. And I remember you have to take a picture together, in a step and repeat. And I forced you guys to take a picture together in a step and repeat. Because it's listen, one day they're going to look at this picture and they're going to remember it. And it's I want to make sure it's memorialized. So
you guys knew.
Yes, something. And Tanya, I would love to get you into this conversation because I know you go at this, it's a little bit different, your situation as a caretaker, but I would love for you to reflect a little bit about your career and how does being a caretaker impacts it.
Hi. Yeah. So I am have a very different story of being a caretaker. It's so my grandmother passed away in January, but I was her healthcare proxy and her power of attorney and all of the things. And my brother's autistic. He's a disabled adult. So I managed both of their care from New York. And it was right when I got the Playwrights Realm Fellowship that my grandmother got really sick. And she did end up passing away of COVID-related illness. And so unfortunately, like the caretaking of disabled adults and like elderly people just isn't as cute and fun as like kids. Like, and not to say that like taking care of kids is cute and fun always, like for my parents of the group, but I think there's much less of the like joy in it, at least in the aspect of like it's very arduous in a lot of ways and typically very thankless. I mean, my brother is a genuinely gentle and lovely human who said he made a pancake this morning, and I was just like, what is life? Like, of course you did, you know? So yeah, it's got moments, but for the most part, I had to like sell their home, and they were having a lot of financial troubles. So I was dealing with both healthcare things and financial things while also doing the fellowship. And I felt like of the four of us, I was the least present, at least for the first 5 or 6 months. And it just, there was nothing to do. Like I would get out of a rehearsal and I would have to try and make sure the like phone was on for them, you know, and I remember being in a rehearsal room, just like yelling at the top of my lungs, like, I cannot do this right now. I have to write a play, you know? And the idea that some things just mattered much more. But it's been an interesting juggle, and I really appreciate the realm for recognizing that caretaker looks like multiple things, and that there's quite a bit of like not only financial but time. You know, I spent a lot of the last 2 years back and forth to Massachusetts, and at one point it was like a full-time job. Like it was really like 45 hours a week. I was clocking in and clocking out. Like I was like, this is really labor intensive and very lonely. Like is my experience of it. It's just very lonely. Like it's not, you know, you don't have I didn't have a lot of people at my age that were doing it in the way that I was doing it. You know, my brother's a disabled adult, so that's going to be the future of our lives together, is figuring out how independent he can be and, you know, how dependent he needs to be. And it's everything from if he goes to the movies, I order the car. You know, if he has an issue with, I mean, I pay for everything. I manage everything, right? It's almost like being a project manager at the extent to which, but it's with your own family. And I would say that I've been involved in his life in that way for the last like 3 or 4 years, but I was like going to IEP, independent education meetings for him since I was in college. So almost 20 years now, you know. And there are definitely times where I'm like, how do I manage being in these two very disparate places and stay artistic and stay on top of, you know, whatever I have on my plate, which is, you know, additionally, thanks to the realm, I have, you know, incredible agents and incredible managers, and I'm working all the time. So just navigating, like being on a, you know, a call with HBO and then being on a call with a lawyer or a social worker, you know, back to back pretty often, actually. So yeah, I think that having this space, and I just want to thank Roberta so much and everybody, is really important because it's sort of the like the dark side of, you know, being an artist is never easy, and then being an artist with dependence and being an artist with like responsibilities outside of yourself just requires, I don't know, a lot of faith, a lot of courage, a lot of community. And thankfully now that things have slowed down and since my grandmother's passed, I've been able to get more social services in place. But even those, like social services require, I mean, Jonathan works in this realm. They require so much discipline and follow through and follow up, you know. I just applied for a grant for my brother, and they're telling me that like the timing on it may be challenging. It's a grant, like a COVID grant to pay his rent. And they're like, yeah, well, it might not come in time for the first of the month, which means that I would then get this is like really, it's wild, right? So this is a government grant. The government grant is supposed to be paying for his like what livelihood essentially. And they're saying it may not come in time to pay the rent for the first of the month, which means he would then get an eviction notice, right? So I'm like, that's bananas. Like, how is that helpful? So when I think about the ways in which help comes, and I think about how like smart and how like detail oriented you have to be, and also you actually have to not rely on it. Like, 'cause if you really had nothing else, like if I had nothing for him, you'd be on the street, So yeah, I think it's been a real, this last 6 months of asking for help, knowing how to ask for help, knowing that the help may not always come on time, but that hopefully it'll come eventually. And knowing that there are just going to be really rough days, there are going to be really rough days where there's too much on my plate, and I'm still trying to find a community of people to relate to this particular kind of life path at the moment. So yeah, those are some things. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. And Tanya, first off, I'm so sorry for the loss of your grandma. I know that she was such an important figure in your life. And I'm glad the Playwrights Realm could be here to support you, but just really also you dealing with that, doing all of this, it's like another thing. And for us, it was necessary to have you as part of this conversation, because as you said, a lot of times it is more focused on, and I mean, parents don't get great support, like, let's be clear, but still the conversation is now starting. And I feel that people that have elder care responsibilities, or as you said, like have other dependents, and now it's even happening, right? There's some people that are sort of in the middle and they're responsible for their parents, and then they also are responsible for their children. So we wanted this conversation to be really inclusive. And this is why for us, it was necessary to have you here and hear your story too. And so I really thank you for being so honest, and because I think that this will help move this forward and start having this more clearly, and we are so proud of you, like your success, like how you're blowing up. Like the first time I think I met you too was when I went to talk to Brooklyn College, and like, you're a superstar. So congratulations on all of that. Plus doing the life stuff, like you're doing it, And so Rachel, with all of this, taking all of this, I wanted to turn back to you a little bit, because a thing that very often, I want to like go right to it. Like a thing that very often I hear is sort of a pushback when you talk about caretaker support, and people saying right away, well, it's not fair to everyone to offer extra support for caretakers. Like if I offer this money for people that have kids or have other dependents, like what about like the single person? Like, what am I going to say to them? So what do we say to those people?
I mean, yeah, my first response is how we create support for caregivers is how we have the conversation of how we talk about care in our industry. Because if you cannot find the ethos and the foundational reasons to support individuals who have responsibilities outside of themselves, as Tanya said so beautifully, then we don't know how to create structures that teach us how to take care of the people around us either. And that comes from our white supremacist and racist systemic issue that this is an isolated individualist designed field still, where you come in, you prove yourself, you don't ask for more than you're given. And if you succeed at the top, you're exceptional. But the design of an institution that is able to create capacity for caregiver support is on the outset, creating a caregiver fund, a stipend, right? So that parents can get babysitters, or that Folks with familial dependents can hire someone to do some of this work while they're creating art. And that might be the label on the budget line item. But missionally, what that organization is doing is asking the question, how do we create access for our contributors to participate in the best way possible? And then what I say to everyone is, and this comes from our compassion training that PAL does for organizations that we did for the Playwrights Realm, our PI project as well, is where we say, everyone is a caregiver at some point. If your organization doesn't know how to create access for folks who have caregiving responsibilities, they're probably going to struggle when you get sick because they don't know how to create strategies that aren't emergent. They don't know how to take care of people who don't experience major life events, and every single human being does. So what I encourage everyone to do, if you're not a caregiver, if you never expect to be a caregiver in your life, is to still invest and still advocate for caregiver support structures, because you're actually investing in a field and an institution that will know how to hear you when you say, I need help, I need support. And caregivers as allies can do that for you as well. So we're learning how to create that support for each other, whether you're a parent or a caretaker or not. And then the final thing that I would say is, whenever we have a reaction where another group is getting support that makes us feel like we're being left out and we're being isolated, that's because likely there's an area of support that we need that we either haven't acknowledged or haven't received support for. And that's the scarcity mindset, right? If you give caregivers this money, or if you give caregivers this support, there's less for me. You're discriminating against me. You're leaving me out. Instead of saying, that's incredible that you're creating support for my colleague. I wonder where I might need access. I wonder if I'm checking with myself to see if this organization is holistic for me as well. And I just encourage folks to say, like, if you experience that reaction where you have a distaste in your, a negative taste in your mouth that caregivers are getting support, ask yourself, well, what support am I missing? What support do I need? And then it really comes from a perversion too of HR compliance, which is that, legally you cannot pay someone more on their salary because they have kids. Like, there are some laws that indicate those distinctions, but that's not the same thing as creating institutional caregiver support. That's very legal. That's very compliant. There are ways to create that institutionally that make the work-life quality of contributing to an artistic institution better for everyone, which we discovered in the Radical Parent Inclusion Project. So yeah, I would say it teaches our organizations how to have the conversation of a culture of care. It's investing in our own caregiving that we may need and not know how to anticipate, and it reduces the scarcity mindset.
Thank you. That was so helpful. And Jonathan, I know that like as a parent, like this is new to you, but you are a social worker and
Yes.
you've worked in this field too. So I'm wondering, obviously there's been a lot of conversations, and Rachel touched upon this a little bit about talking about white supremacist culture and all of that, and sort of the impact of COVID specifically on Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and sort of like how those communities have been impacted, and specifically caretakers within those communities too. Like there have been a lot of studies about caretakers that have to leave the workforce, stay at home with kids or whatnot. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about specific challenges that those communities have been facing because of this crisis, compounding everything. And Tanya, same question to you in terms of the, Black, Indigenous, people of color, COVID crisis, caretaking, like all of those things together. What are the specific challenges that you might be seeing right now?
Oh man, that is a very tiny question. It's like, where do I start? I think the best way I can come at this is, it's been intriguing to be, so I'm married to someone who works for Sloan Kettering, and she's a cancer biologist. And so she is doing much, much better than I am doing. And so there were worries I had as an artist slash social worker in terms of how I would be able to support myself if I were to have a kid. What would childcare be? How could I take care of that? And now, under the guise of the pandemic and just the loss of jobs, and the people who are in jobs that are who were in jobs that were not A, paying enough, B, providing support for childcare, or people who are supporting their elders and stuff. I am part of the sandwich generation too, in terms of raising a kid and having an elderly mother who unfortunately passed away last year. So, and the difficulty in terms of being in New York City and she being in LA, it was quite a tumultuous time in terms of how to coordinate care for my mother versus being home here with my child. I think, big question, but what I really have noticed, because I'm a social worker as well, and so I work with people who are on the fringes of society, who don't have the financial support, who are basically begging, the government to help them in a sense. And the pandemic has been quite a trying time, specifically in terms of isolation, in terms of workers in the field being overwhelmed, and the balance or the need for support has been a big scarcity. I wish I prepared for that question. Maybe Tanya will be better in terms of that. I think what was hard about my experience is that I was in the pandemic and with a newborn. So a lot of my focus was on the baby, as well as my wife's parents who were visiting from India. So I feel like there's so much that I missed out on in terms of the past year, just in terms of trying to take care of a child and keep my work together, and find a space for creativity. I mean, it's just been, I posited that it would be hard to find work. I find time to write and create. And that's really been a more of a selfish focus in terms of family and trying to find space for my artwork. But I think it is telling to be living on the Upper East Side and to hear all the stories I hear as a social worker, just in terms of the support that people need. And the government's sort of confusion and fights with each other, and the support they can provide. The people who need the help is sort of left on the back burner to egos and competition and just silly things. It's definitely been a rough time for all of those things.
Jonathan, I think that was a beautiful answer. That was so honest, and like the personal and the public, like, it all came together for all of us, I think, in this. So thank you for being so candid. Tanya, do you have anything to add?
Can you, I heard the question, but then it sort of like escaped me. Can you just repeat it exactly so I can narrow my focus?
Yeah. Specifically, I was wondering about sort of like both of your intersectional identities, and like the pandemic specifically has been specifically rough for Black, Indigenous people of color. And then within that being caretakers as well. And so were there any specific challenges that came of that you either observed and experienced, or that you saw other people in your community experiencing? And I think you touched a little bit upon that when you talked about like the difficulty in terms of getting social services, which Jonathan already talked about, but is there anything else that comes to mind? And if there isn't, that's okay. We can move on to the next question.
I mean, living in the world as a Black and woman and queer person is never, there's in a pandemic, like it just adds so many layers to it. I think that around last year, with all the protests that were happening at the same time, it just kind of felt like, it never quite feels safe to be in America, but it was like Black and brown people were also the, frontline workers. We were also, it was hard to watch people clapping in Brooklyn for the frontline workers when I felt like I wasn't sure that that's what they needed. I was like, do they need financial support? Like, can we take this energy that we're putting and like send them food right now because they're working and putting their lives on the line. My best friend's father was a nurse, and he quit because he'd been a nurse for many years. So yeah, I think that there was a lot of fear in our community, and a lot of like misinformation initially, which was really hard to dispel and to to come to terms with. And this feeling of, yes, everyone is dealing with this to a certain extent, but disproportionately is still affecting communities of color. And in that case, I don't feel exempt. In fact, I feel somewhat attacked. And then I, had a couple of instances of having to go to hospitals around me, and the hospitals in New York especially are so bad, and they're in communities of color, and they're just so under resourced, and dirty, like really, really, really disorientingly bad. I grew up in Massachusetts, and the healthcare system's better there. It just is, they have better hospitals. People go from a lot of other places to go to hospitals in Mass. So I had never really seen it. It's like there, and it's every time I see it is when I work in the public school system. Like every time I enter a public school system, I'm shocked by what is not available. So yes, and then when I think about the theater and as being a caretaker in the theater, and how there's this moment of let's talk about things, like let's reinvent, and yet we're coming back and we're starting theater like in a way where there's so many question marks about whether it's healthy to be together, and yet all these plays are opening up, and I'm just curious about it. Like I'm very wary of the way in which we are re-entering these spaces after a year and some change, a year and a half of asking these questions of what needs to be done. And other than, a lot of, conversation, I'm not quite sure what the action steps are to sort of ensure our safety, ensure our mental health going back into it, and to incorporate those of us that are, Black and brown and taking care of multiple people. Like it's just, there's so many layers and levels to it. So I guess my biggest thing is I keep prioritizing my mental health and prioritizing my physical health. I'm currently in the Virgin Islands taking a little bit of a break because New York is really a lot right now, and it's really a lot everywhere. So yeah, I think there's an element of both awareness and action, right? So we have this idea that we say things, and we get on panels, and but my sort of question, my larger question is, what are the action steps? What are you taking to move the dial forward so that we feel taken care of in spaces together? We feel that differences can be withheld in these spaces. Everything from, okay, if we're going to have land acknowledgements, like, is there a portion of the money that actually goes towards those Indigenous communities? Because I'm honestly kind of frustrated with the idea that we would acknowledge Indigenous communities but not contribute to their health and well-being in this moment. Some of my very good friends are from the Mohawk Nation, and they are being silenced still, and they are vastly under-resourced and vastly on the fringe of society. So if we're going to, before our meetings, say we're on the Lenape land, what are we actually doing for those folks that still live in those communities? Yeah. So I think we are in a moment of sparking awareness, but I think that the next step is making a commitment to community engagement, making a commitment to not just speaking things, but endeavoring to create inclusion at the core of the mission that you have, right? If your mission, if that's an addendum to what your mission statement is, and your mission statement hasn't been revised in the last 2 years, then I think you're not paying attention.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I want to uplift what you said about we can't go back to business as usual, right? It can't just be like, because for many people, as you pointed out, that is literally impossible. Like communities were ravaged. It's still happening, are being like the currently, right? And so this is actually a perfect segue, because I do want to talk now a little bit about what you said about like the action, and sort of like, if we're talking about caretaker support, it's like, what can people actualize? Like what is being done in the field now? I know that there are people here that are part of companies that want to start this, or people that are going to be listening later. And so first of all, Rachel, I have this question for you. An organization has never offered any consistent caretaker support. I know you get this question all the time. Like if they come to you and they say like, where can I start? Like, what do you say to them?
Roberta, you and I have this conversation all the time, and I say, let's take a look at your budget. Your budgets are your values. And I just want to also uplift what Tanya said, which is, we're less in, PAL at least is less interested in, the fanfare or what we call now glory projects of, on Tuesday in October only, we're doing an event for moms. And then the rest of the year, anyone who works there is left completely strapped to take care of their own caretaking and shut up about it. And that to us is not caregiver support. But we do compassion training, which is where we train institutions on how to create a culture of care with caregiver support, because we also want them to know those tangible assets of support, creating a caregiver fund or doing things like that, will be so impossible to sustain if you do not integrate it into your mission statement. We created the new standard of care, which is up on our website, which are 3 pillars of justice and 11 action steps. And the first one is you cannot have an anti-racist organization without formal caregiver support. The second one is you cannot be gender inclusive without formal caregiver support. And the third is you cannot support reproductive rights without caregiver support. And when we address them by saying, people have intersectional realities. You can't be like, oh, we're going to focus on anti-racism, and then we're going to focus on disability, and then we're going to focus on caregivers, because all of these realities exist in the people who you're trying to create access for in your organization. It has to be, like Tanya said, core and missional. So you get started by, let's have a sit down and let's deconstruct this idea of caregiving support and see how we can apply it to the tasks you already have in your organization. And then we can talk about, adding these extra items like a childcare matinee and things like that. And I always advocate for a childcare stipend. There's a saying that I've been using even more so now with the pandemic, where I say caregivers are drowning in praise, but still starving for support. And it's sort of like, oh my gosh, you're a mom, you're a superhero. And I'm like, don't call me a superhero, donate to my childcare. Like that is exactly what Tanya is saying. It's like, thank you. That's like, I see that like the hearts and the feelings are in the right place. But if it stops there, it stays performative, and we're still drowning. So my first step recommendation after, you deconstruct your organizational mission, you realize that caregiving is actually at the heart of creating access in all of these other areas. I say, put it on the budget. Where are you creating financial support for people with caregiving responsibilities? And we can build even more programs from there, but I would at least start there.
Cool. And Tanya and Jonathan, a question for you. What is one thing that you wish every organization who is working with you or will work with you in the future knew about your roles as caretakers?
That it never ends. That it just never ends. Like there's no days off. Oh my God, there's no days off. Never. Mm-mm. And I know, like, my friends with kids are like, you have no idea. And I'm like, I know. But if you have never taken care of like people in this system, then you also don't have any idea. Like it's just there's no days off. And it's a full body, like emotional experience that when you are expected to deliver, you may have things change. So I think that if the organizations could know that, like, I want to do what you're asking me to do, but I may have an application due, or I may have to like set everything aside because he's had a panic attack, or like I may have a crisis that happens in the middle of the night, and I cannot prepare for that, right? And I'm not. And the idea that the structures that we live on don't give us that space, that don't even on basic level have, I was fighting with the nonprofit I worked for that didn't have a bereavement leave. And I was like, what am I supposed to do? Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm just supposed to show up to my job with middle schoolers? Like, it just, that the priority may be my caretaking, not because I am not going to be good at my job, and that I can't do my job, and I feel like this might resonate with the parents as well. Like, I can't do my job if my beloved is not okay. Like, I'm not going to be present. And as much as, like, art and making art is like what sustains me and what I love, like if I stopped being that, I'm always going to be my brother's caretaker. Like I'm always going to be his big sister, and I'm always going to be the person that he can count on, and that's more important. It is more important.
That's beautiful. And Jonathan, you looking at the future, what is something that you wish organizations knew?
In every application that I fill out asking for money, I always say that the most important thing an artist needs is space and time. And that is the heart of creativity, is having the space and the time to do the work. And I always feel sort of sad that in history, there have been these people who could have been something, but they weren't given that space and time. There are so many people who could have been the next big thing, I think about all my friends who are actors. I started as an actor. I went to school in England, and I studied acting out there for 3 years. And even with the amount of support that, the UK has for the arts, there's only about a handful of people who are still at it. And, I felt the work they were doing, I could be biased, but, they were great, great performers. These were great people who could have, grown to, be the next big thing. And so I think the theory about being an actor, or the theory about being mainly actors, I guess I wouldn't place that on playwrights, but that you're hitting the ground, you're stumping, you're pushing hard, you're clawing at things. There's a scarcity of money. Life is hard as an actor, and I'm curious about what would happen if people were given the funding for the full experience of their life, as opposed to just the work you give. I would hope for the future as a playwright. I think I've always been worried about saying that I'm a playwright. There was a deal of shame in terms of saying I'm a playwright, dating my, dating my wife who was a scientist. I'm like, I'm a playwright, I'm sorry, and there's I can't promise you anything, there's no sort of straight line. You can't just go to school, you get your degree and then you blow up, I think that's sort of where I am is, it's exciting to hear that Playwrights Realm is talking about this radical parent and has practiced this radical parent inclusion. I mean, I heard about it before, I even had a child. And so it's amazing that that sort of space is provided for actors and playwrights. And that seems like just a wonderful place to start, is the understanding that people have more than one thing going on. So that's sort of my 2 cents.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue actually, because I wanted to shout out organizations, and thank you for the Realm shout out. And I know Jenna just shared the link with some of the work we've been doing, but I just want to shout out other organizations too that have been doing good work, and people could look at, people that are interested in knowing more about this. So this is just open to anybody. Like if you've had an experience with an organization, either through an official program or something that you did that they're like, oh, this was really meaningful to me. I know, Rachel, we've done a lot of research on that. Just want to open some space to share it. And I just want to remind everybody, if who's watching, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A. If we don't have any questions, I'll keep asking my questions. But yeah, but just wanted to open some space for the organizations that are doing the work.
Yeah, I always love to shout out Elevator Repair Service. They had been budgeting for their caregivers for a very long time. Ariana Smart Truman doing it for the Worcester Group summer program. I also am always so grateful to New 42 for the family room that they've established. It's not just a lactation space, it's actually just a space for anyone who is caregiving to have something set aside, a quiet space. The Realm is an organization that we always shout out. And I know that Art New York and the public have been partnering with PAL every year on our summit. And the first year when it was in person, last year, of course, was digital. Both spaces, Art New York and the public, allowed us to have childcare on site for our attendees. And for such established institutions like the Realm and Art New York and the public to put that example out there. And New 42, when we did our PI of this is possible to have children in the space, and as Roberta says, not solve the problem of children, is extraordinary. So just going to shout that out.
Jonathan and Tanya, any specific examples that you've had? And if not, that's okay too.
I mean, mostly the Realm is the only one that's acknowledged it as a thing. So
I was not fishing for a compliment, Tanya, I promise you.
Take it.
I'll take it.
Worth it.
Take it. Just take it. I mean, the Realm is the only organization that I know of that even acknowledges it at all. So, so I'm very, very blessed and grateful that I've been able to receive both, like, I'm going to be doing a retreat with them this year, and there's been like COVID funding around caretaking. So that's been really helpful. And yeah, I think that just the actual acknowledgement of it, I think being able to say, like, actually I have this responsibility and there's space for it to take up, and I don't have to be ashamed of it, I think there's like a lot of shame around it. But I love the idea of the sitting room. That's really, that sounds amazing. And I think if I'm thinking about things I might need or like would appreciate, I guess I would like institutions to, and I don't know what this would look like, so I'm just like throwing it out here. For example, like, there are times when caretaking is sort of normal and like it's just a day-to-day thing and there's nothing to really report. But maybe at the beginning of a show or the beginning of a project, being able to have like a space to check in tangibly and be like, this is what my caregiving situation is right now. For example, when I to sort of go back to when I started my fellowship, the first chunk like is a blur and I really can't really remember it because I was in the midst of, selling my family's home. So, if I could have been able to articulate that in a sort of tangible way and be like, all right, I may need to change the schedule or, actually I could, is there any additional financial support? Because I'm going back and forth to Massachusetts all the time or, just really whatever it is, being able to like, it's as dumb as like, could you order me donuts today? Because like I losing my mind and my house like is not gonna get sold in time and like I'm gonna like have an aneurysm before this rehearsal to like having a meditation and just being like having an intentional check-in. So, especially for those of us, there were 4 playwrights within my fellowship. Is that typical? I think it's 4, between 4 and 5. So, and Jonathan also like I knew through the realm, like I knew him personally as a friend, but then I did get to see his production at the realm. So it was really wonderful to be introduced to the realm through Jonathan. And yeah, so I'm thinking about like intentional check-ins that way. And of the 4 of us, I had the most, at the time, the most like strenuous external life things. So I felt like, and I feel like a lot of people that take, that have kids and that have caretaking responsibilities, we feel like we're failing all the time, right?
Yeah.
And right? Like, we feel like we're failing and we feel like there's no
and at everything, at like being caretakers, at being yes,
being a human being.
Yeah. Like around that time I was just right after the fellowship I got my agents and everything's a blur, but like I was just starting to work with UTA. And I was like on a call to the West Coast, but I also was like making my brother dinner and my grandmother was in the hospital and he needed to go to the like emergency room. And I was like, you're going to have to hold because you can't go to the ER too. Like, I can't do this. Like one of you can be in the hospital at a time, but you're just going to have to hold. Like, So yeah, poor guy. He was like, what do you mean I have to hold? Like, what? It's not a take 10 kind of thing, right? So yeah, it's that. It's being able to have like a space, a physical, literal space. That would be amazing because I needed space to be able to be on those phone calls and not embarrass myself in front of people and scream and shout. Like a quiet space to just decompress and like a space to say, hey, the next 6 weeks are going to be really hard. What can we do?
Yeah. And one of the things to actually jump on that is that I've been seeing in a lot of meetings or rehearsals, even pre-pandemic, there's now this conversation about access needs. And I'm sure you've been in those rooms that say, I have no access needs or something like that. And I have seen some people at the realm, we started incorporating childcare or even caretaking responsibilities into that. Like sometimes in the virtual room, I'm like, listen, my daughter doesn't have school today. So like a child might jump on my lap during this meeting and that is happening. Like there's literally nothing I can do about it, or there's no childcare because we were in the middle of a pandemic, right? So like you might be listening to Baby Shark on the background of this meeting. That's what's up. So I wonder if like this idea of access needs, which I know something that Rachel, you talk a lot about and Pal talks a lot about, which, I find really exciting. And maybe that is a way in as to just open the door. And it's okay to say these things. It's okay. We're going to meet you where you are, which is what the realm is aiming to do now with a lot of our programs, not just for caretakers, as you both know, we're offering a lot of different kinds of support in many different ways because we are trying to meet playwrights where they're at. I am going to ask one last thing so we can wrap this up. But I just wanted to see if anybody had anything to plug. I'll do mine first. And then, so if you have a show coming up or a friend's show or a website or anything that you want to share with people, now is the time. I will do mine first. And so next Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, we're doing another panel that's called Tickets, Please. And it's basically about we have experts from both nonprofit and commercial theater. We're going to be discussing different ticketing models and how ticketing models are used to grow and diversify the audience. So, we have Francisco from The Realm, because we have our ticket for every budget. And then we have somebody from Soho Rep, we have somebody from Hamilton, and somebody from MCC, and we're just having this conversation about what does that mean to make tickets accessible and and so I hope everybody comes to check that out. Does anybody else have another plug? Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, we PAL, under the incredible leadership, we have a shared leadership structure of 5 people, and our producing director is Garley Cornelia Jones, and we partnered with her organization Blackboard Plays and just finished the Black Motherhood and Parenting New Play Festival, which was incredible. And we're going to be having more conversations this year to help raise money for our Black Parent Artist Grant. And then on August 2nd, we're having the Motherhood Concert, where we funded 6 mother composers and hired mother and father performers as well to create a blank page grant for a mother composer, along with Maestro Moms and Philadelphia Women's Theater Festival. So, this is the opportunity, like we talked about, to create that financial support. PAL is all volunteer right now. And so all of the donations go toward creating stipends for the festival contributors. For the Bump Fest, we had a Black artist exclusive budget where we paid everyone and hired only Black artists. And our goal is to create this Black Parent Artist Grant. So just know, if you are able to contribute to those programs, you're helping us create grants for people to make their work. So that's what I'll share.
Jonathan, Tanya, anything you want to plug?
I just want to say that's awesome, Rachel. Be in touch, because that's so awesome. I'm also so grateful that Jonathan's on here, because what made me think about it was I don't feel like there's enough discussion about fathers, right, and how fathers are, and I'm sure that so much of that has changed, but in what I know to be true now is that my friends with children, especially the men in my life, are doing like full-time caregiving and also full-time artistry. And that is its own, like, thankfully I noticed that they're like finding communities around it. My friend has a daddy like on Instagram group that he meets up with, like Daddies and Donuts. So yeah, it's in LA. It's great. So yeah, I think finding that there are different kinds of, and there's that is a more inclusive space to be in. Me personally, I've got a couple of projects that I can't share yet, but suffice to say, send good energy, because they're closing and it's very good, and they're gonna pay me money, which is wonderful. And there are a lot of like Black protagonists, which I'm really excited about. But I am going to Poland this year on my friend's Fulbright grant as an actor. I'm actually half Polish, which is something people don't really know about me. And I'm playing a character that's Polish American. And we're going to be doing this very queer dope play. Ari Knox is the playwright. I went to Brooklyn College with them, and we just had a workshop of the play. Poland is not a place where queer theater happens, nor is it accepting of queer folks or Black folks. So there's some like personal questions I have about it. It's politically a challenging place to go, but it also very much excites me. So yeah, that's my next like theater endeavor, and that's in November of this year. Yeah.
Very cool. And Jonathan,
Yeah.
anything?
Two quick things. The first thing is I have a play opening at Rattlestick in January. And so it's on homelessness in New York City. And it's interactive game that sort of puts you in the feet of homeless folk and the decisions they have to make day to day. So it's quite a cool piece that originated in Hungary, and they're doing it here in New York City. And the amazing thing is how much I'm sort of adapting it, and it's amazing how familiar Hungary is to New York City. The homelessness, the problem with homelessness is almost universal. So that's opening in January sometime. So we're still figuring dates for that. And the last thing is my son started walking recently. So it was an amazing thing. It didn't seem like he would do it, but he was busy playing with something and then just decided, here, I'm walking. So such a great discovery. So those are my two proud plugs.
That's something wonderful to celebrate. I want to just thank all the panelists, Jonathan, Rachel, Tanya. Thank you so much for the time, for being so honest and being part of this important conversation. And I'll just turn it back over to Jenna.
I'll second that thanks, and thanks for everyone who joined us. Community programs, which is what this panel is a part of, are new for us this year, and we're continuing them into next year. So you can keep an eye on that community programming link for any announcements. We have a couple coming up still in the rest of July and August that are already up there, and we'll have more to announce very soon. Thank you so much to our panel. And I know it's particularly hard for caretakers to get us in their schedule. So a very special thanks to you guys. That's all. Thanks everyone for joining us.